Welcome to another episode of Health Your Way podcast, where we discuss health issues ranging from physical, mental, emotional, as well as current facts. Today's episode, let's talk about grief. My guest, Kirsten Frey, who's a former police officer, a certified grief recovery specialist, who's passionate and believes her purpose is to guide people through their own unique changes, transition, and losses in their life. I want to say welcome to the show. I appreciate this actual conversation with you because I don't think a lot of people talk about it. And before we dive into it, anything you want to add or say?
No, I think that's a great insight. I appreciate the opportunity because this is such a misunderstood topic of conversation. So I'm just thrilled that we're here today and we get to chat about it.
I like it. I think before we dive further into the conversation, a lot of people may think they understand what grief is. Like, what is considered grief, and are there stages? Because we all know there's different stages to other things, but is there any for grief per se?
So that's an excellent question because grief, so just to start off with like a definition so people understand, most people understand grief as like the normal and natural reaction to an emotional loss of any kind. And usually we equate grief to things like a death, like a physical death of a family member or going through a divorce. But it's also the conflicting emotions that come up for us when there's an end to something or a change in our familiar pattern of behavior. So what that means is that grief isn't just around death and divorce, but there's actually many more, over 40 in fact, life experiences that can create feelings of grief.
I know what you're saying. I think for me, I automatically assume grief was, you lost somebody. But what I'm getting from you is that, you could just have a change of lifestyle or you lost something about yourself, and that's considered grief. Doesn't have to be overwhelming change, basically, is what I understand.
It can be anything where there's a significant emotional reaction to a loss of any kind. So for example, it could be if you lost your job, going through COVID, like this whole pandemic experience that we're going through. So many of us, it's changed the way that we're doing business. It's changing the way our kids are going to school. Kids didn't get to graduate back in June from high school and so on. So those normal rituals that we would have around an ending, like a natural ending, didn't get to happen. So it's sad that there wasn't an opportunity to kind of close out a period of time for those kids, right? And they just kind of moved on, but didn't accept the fact that there might actually be some grief around that. Can also happen if you're experiencing infertility, if we've lost a pet, if retirement, so even though retirement is seen as this very positive life change, you get more freedom, you get more schedule to do all the things that you love to do. But for a lot of us, we identify by what we do for work for the 25 or 30 or more years that we're in our career. So when that changes, all of a sudden now you're not going to the same place of business, your whole routine has changed. Now you're not seeing the same people that you would see at work every day, and all those relationships that you had at work, all of those come to an end. So it's just the natural ending that happens with normal life experiences that we all go through. And that's the thing, we'll all experience many losses throughout our lifetime.
When you say it like that, it takes me back about a lot of things that I may have not realized I was grieving because I just thought it was normal. But especially with the whole COVID-19 right now, is it COVID-19? Yes. A lot of us may have missed having a different life experience because we're stuck at home. We lost that opportunity. And a lot of us are, we're experiencing that grief. We don't realize this grief through other methods, through maybe physical pain or mental pain or things like that. And I think I want to ask you, what are some of the misconceptions out there that you believe most people have that's harmful for them when it comes to grief?
Such a great question. And I just want to circle back to the stages. Please. Sorry, only because it's really important. Popular opinion is that we've all heard like the 5 stages of grief, right? That we go through. So this was pivotal work that was done by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross years ago, where she changed the whole dynamic for hospice care and the rights for the dying. And so those stages of grief were actually discovered for people who had received a terminal illness diagnosis. They were never actually meant to be for the people left behind. the grievers. So it was to help someone who had received the diagnosis that they were dying and to go through those stages. But grief doesn't have stages. And you might not go through all those experiences like anger or denial or, you know, some of those things. So for example, if you had someone, a family member who had been very ill and has subsequently died, but you had a chance to say goodbye, you got to tell them all the things that were in your heart that you could share with them, and you felt very complete emotionally by saying goodbye to them. Well, there's no denial that the death has happened. There's no anger. You got to say exactly what you needed to say. And that's actually a really great situation where you're actually complete emotionally with a loss. So yes, there's a natural sadness and grief, but there's not the painful feelings that get attributed to grief. Like sometimes there's anger or resentment, bitterness, frustration, like any of those painful feelings, including anger, that can really hold us back in our life. And that's the point that we're really trying to help people with the grief recovery method.
Before we go further, what exactly are the 5 stages? You said 5 stages of grief, right?
Yeah, so I don't even talk about them often because we don't attribute the 5 stages of grief, but I think it's like there's denial, anger, bargaining. There's all these things that they go through. But what happens is because there's really been no other information, we've never been taught like how to navigate all these emotional losses that we experience in our lives. So what happens is we default to the only information that was out there, which is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's pivotal work on death and dying. But again, it was for people that were going through the dying process. It wasn't actually meant to be for the grievers that were left behind. But due to the lack of any other kind of information, people just kind of glommed on to those 5 stages.
I see what you mean.
But, and that's unfortunately something that holds a lot of people back because they feel, well, I'm not experiencing anger, or I'm not going through denial. So am I doing it wrong? And there is no wrong way to go through grief. We all go through it in our own way. It's completely unique to us.
I like that. And then you mentioned something about the grief recovery specialist. What is them, and what type of services like do you offer as a specialist for a grief recovery specialist? I just don't understand that concept really. Educate me, please.
So I have been trained through the Grief Recovery Institute, which is through the United States. And so I have my certification as a certified grief recovery specialist. And what that means is that I have had my own losses in my life. I have done my own grief work, and based on my own personal experiences that I've had as a former police officer and also as a holistic practitioner, 26 years of that, I've seen the impact that it can have on our lives negatively, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, like all our mental health, a lot of those issues that come up when we don't or are not allowed to express our grief or even recognize it as grief.
Okay. I guess, so you help them in an holistic way. Is it a set program or is it individualized? And before you answer that, is it even, like a lot of people are listening and I'm listening to you, is there any evidence behind the recovery specialist? Am I saying right? The grief recovery method.
Yes.
That's it, correct? Okay.
Yes. So the grief recovery method has been around for almost 40 years now. So it is an evidence-based educational program that has been designed for grievers to help them discover and recover what is emotionally incomplete for them from a loss of any kind. So it's an education program. So it's not therapy or counseling. And I am not a therapist or a counselor. So I just want to make that really clear. I'm a coach. And so what I do is I educate people on the misconceptions of grief that we're going to speak about. And then I also help them take the action steps to move through their own grief recovery. So then they become emotionally complete with whatever their loss is that they are experiencing.
I see that. I get that. So you basically, you aid them and you help them understand what they're going through, and then you create a plan and you move through that plan based on what program you have. Is that my understanding, or is it?
I don't even create the plan. The plan's already done.
Oh,
it is
nice.
Very simple. It is a simple process, just not easy, because for a lot of us, we're dealing with emotions and we've never really been taught how to do that. So we have a tendency to default to our logical mind, to try to analyze, figure out, you know, sort it out in our heads. And that's actually where I got stuck for a great big portion of a couple of the grief experiences that I had, was defaulting to my logical mind. But grief isn't logical, it's emotional. So when we try to use our head to fix our heart, it's the wrong tool for the job. It's just we've never been taught otherwise. So that's what's so wonderful about the grief recovery method, is that we actually give people the tools. So once people work with me, they have those tools for the rest of their life to deal with any other losses that they may be experiencing. And they also become a much better support for the people in their lives who are going through their own losses. Because even though loss isn't something that we experience often, we do go through it regularly. They say the average person goes through a significant loss every 9 to 13 years. So it happens, but it doesn't happen so often that we actually know how to actually navigate that experience. So what the grief recovery method does is it gives people the tools to navigate that emotionally significant experience in a really healthy way.
I get what you're saying. I think for me, what really stuck was when you mentioned that we aren't taught how to deal with grief. Like there's no educate, like we go to school, there's no course. Like I don't remember going to university or college, there's no course saying how to deal with life issues or grief, or even how to, there isn't one. I think you just meant to just deal with it. People just suck it up. And sometimes people can't suck it up. Some people just need a guide. I'm just sitting here listening to what you're saying. Sorry, go ahead.
I love it. See, this is what I love so much about this, because even our conversation here, I can see like the lights turning on, right? And this is what I love when I talk to people, because most people don't understand grief. We don't want to talk about it. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. We try to avoid those kinds of feelings. So what happens is grief remains this really misunderstood conversation, very uncomfortable conversation. And yet what's so interesting is that we all are going to experience it. So at some point, we're all walking around wounded. We just don't have the tools, and the people who in our lives who are well-meaning and well-intentioned sometimes say things or show up in ways for us that aren't emotionally helpful at the time. So you asked me about some of the misconceptions of grief. And so in grief recovery, we call them myths that we have around grief. And exactly to your point about like not learning about grief, one of the very first things that we learn is, and we learn this in a very young age, usually before the age of 7, is don't be sad or don't feel sad. You know, so we have something happen, you know, we lose our toy or the family pet dies, and it's like, don't feel sad because our parents don't want to see us hurting. You know, here's a cookie kind of thing. And what that does is, all it does is distract us from the feelings that we have. There's nothing wrong with feeling sad. But we learn very early on, when people are constantly telling us, don't feel sad, don't feel bad, it's okay. Well, in the moment, it's not okay. And so when we hear that, we learn as a young person from the people that we trust that, oh, I can't show up with how I'm actually feeling because I'm being told that it's okay and don't feel sad, like as if there's something wrong with feeling sad. And of course it's not. It's one of our normal human emotions that we are meant to feel. So of course, as little people, we want to be pleasing to the people that are taking care of us, the people that we trust. So if our parents are telling us, don't feel sad, well, then we start to hide. So at a very early age, we learn to bury or suppress our natural emotions that come up during a loss. It's normal for us to feel those feelings.
I get what you're saying. And while you're talking, I'm thinking there's a lot of challenging people out there that have issues because they haven't been able to address some of their losses properly. And I'm just thinking, if as a society, if we learn to understand that there's a process, there's a place, maybe a lot of us would not be as complicated as we should be, because we have learned the tools to deal with our own emotions properly.
100%. And there's like 6 misconceptions that you talked about. So one is the don't feel sad or don't feel bad. The second one is replace the loss. So again, we tend to learn this very early on. So again, we lose our favorite toy, which is a little person, sad, right? Or we lose the family pet. That's usually one of our first experiences with loss that we see as a young person. And again, our parents don't want us to be in pain. They hate to see us feeling hurting. But again, our parents don't sit us down at the kitchen table typically and talk about grief and loss and all these emotions that are coming up for us, because they were never taught either, Mo. So
Exactly.
you can't teach what you don't know. And of course, you can't share and be there for people if you don't also have those tools. So what happens is this becomes generational, which is why grief still remains this very uncomfortable conversation, which is why I love that you're giving us the opportunity to have this conversation here now. So when we replace the loss, what happens is we learn early on, oh, I can just replace what I've lost. But the problem is that we have a relationship. So let's say, for example, we had the family dog passed away and died. So we loved our dog. We did everything. We played with the dog all the time. And now the dog's no longer there. So parents go out and 2 weeks later, get us a new dog. Well, we don't feel the same way about that dog because it's a completely different dog. It's not the same relationship. It's not, we don't feel the same way. And that's the thing. It's the relationship with either the person or the experience that we're having. But what happens is we learn, okay, we can just replace those losses. So fast forward to, middle school or high school when we have our first real love and our hearts are broken. And what do we hear from people? There's plenty of fish in the sea. He or she wasn't good enough for you. Don't you worry. There's somebody else. You'll hook up in no time. But in the meantime, it's not acknowledging the relationship that was and the feelings that need to be completed about that relationship. So what happens is whatever's left incomplete, it's like picking up a rock and throwing it in our backpack. And we carry that backpack into our next relationship where
100%.
The walls are up a little bit. We're a little more guarded. We don't allow ourselves to be truly open. And that's almost where a little bit of self-sabotage comes into these things. So every time we're emotionally incomplete, we've thrown another rock in the backpack. And what happens is, again, because it doesn't happen often, we adapt to that load. So over a lifetime, that load can get heavier or heavier. If it's a really significant loss, much heavier. It's a boulder in the backpack. We adapt to the load and we carry it. It's only when we start taking the rocks out of the backpack or take the backpack off that we realize, like, I can breathe, I'm free. But we need to know how to do that.
And you have to be also ready. A lot of people are not ready to deal with that. I'm just like, I know there's
Yes.
some people out there just like, they're in denial. No,
Yes.
I think at one point I was that person. And, when you talk about, you carry a lot of baggage with you. And even I've always thought, I think maybe in my ignorance, is grief was related to like death. I never thought grief could be related to like loss of relationship or change of certain things or change of lifestyle. Just a change of something's different from what you used to. And a lot of people may not, going back to the relationship specifically, a lot of people don't realize that they may never get closure, but they have to find a way to deal with that so it doesn't come as an extra baggage and makes them heavier. Because you change if you let that hold on to you. And it's you're right, sabotaging, because you can ruin a possibility of a future relationship that can help you because you are still stuck at that moment. You haven't dealt with that kind of feeling that you had from that loss.
Yeah, because we're emotionally,
you're taking me back.
It's so perfect, right?
You're taking me back.
And that's exactly what it is. When we are emotionally incomplete from any kind of loss that we have, it can limit our capacity for happiness moving forward. Yes. And that's what's so beautiful about the grief recovery method, is that it actually helps give us the tools. So if we're going to continue with the misconceptions, the third one is grieve alone. So these next two, grieve alone and be strong, these were mine. Mo, I carried these like a banner through almost my whole life as a police officer, as, a holistic practitioner, personal trainer. I mean, we learn. We are tribal beings as human beings. We are not meant to be alone. Isolation is a learned behavior. But because we were told early on, if you're going to cry, go to your room and cry, right?
Or hold on. The best one was like, if you're going to cry, why are you crying for? I'll give you something to cry for. Oh,
exactly,
Lord.
Right? We all heard those things growing up, right? So we learn to, again, swallow our naturally occurring emotions that come up. And again, I really just want to, because we haven't been learned and we haven't been allowed to give free rein to the emotions as they come up for us, what happens is emotion is just energy in motion. So it's meant to move through us. Like when you look at little kids, when we were little kids, if you spend any kind of time with a little person, in an hour, they're happy, they're sad, they're curious, they're grumpy, they're enthusiastic, they're curious. We go through all these emotions and they don't hang on to any of them. They flow right through them, right? We have that ability too. It's just we've learned to deny that. So what happens is we learn to suppress and bury all those emotions. And what happens is that over a lifetime, that's a lot of energy to try to suppress that. And what happens is those emotions will leak out at some place. And again, it will leak out physically, emotionally, in our career, our relationships, our finances. It will leak out somewhere. And oftentimes it's a big explosion. It's like having a tea kettle and you stopper it up and the steam's got nowhere to go. And so there's a big emotional blowout when that happens. And we see that a lot for people, especially coming into midlife.
Honestly, I have to have another episode with you because there's so much. I'm sorry. Like, honestly, when we were talking, I don't think people realize how much grief plays into the mental health, the relationship health, the physical, the financial health. Like when you said financial, a lot of people, when they lose something, they may go spend money, you know, stuff like that. And then, I mean, let me not divert because my mind is going everywhere, really. I think for a lot of people that are listening to you and are interested in what you're saying, because I'm interested in what you're saying. I may not be going through a specific loss right now. I may know somebody or, you know, at least educate myself. And I've learned a lot so far just talking to you. What's the best platform to reach you out? I think that's what I'm asking because my head's just spinning. Like, how do we reach out to you? Sorry.
No, thank you. So the best way to reach out to me is through my website. I do discovery calls for anybody that wants to have more of a discussion about what grief is and is this something that might be helpful for them. And that's at www.tlclifecoaching.com. I'm also on Facebook as Transitions Life Coaching and on Instagram as TLC Life Coaching as well.
I like that. I'm sorry. Lately, my episodes have just been hitting me too close to the heart. And I think when reaching out to you, what should the audience know about you that separates from others that do the same thing you do?
Yeah, so there's many people that do the work that I do as a grief recovery specialist.
No, actually, no, let's step back. No, there isn't. I've looked, you guys are not well known. Like, you're not well known. I'm sorry. Like, I think the question is selfish, but why should somebody reach out to you if it's not a therapist, or what makes you special? I think that's the question I want to go with, really.
Right. So grief recovery method is not therapy or counseling, as I mentioned. It would be a good complement if you're already in therapy or counseling, which is great because I have nothing but the utmost, respect and honor for those people that do that kind of work. And I've used that work, so I know how impactful it is. But grief recovery can be standalone as well. So for people that have still resistance to therapy or counseling, this might be a good initial first step for them. That would be really helpful. And what makes me different, I think, from some other people is, again, I have 26 years of combined experience as a police officer and as a holistic practitioner. So I know how to hold space for people who have gone through truly difficult experiences, and I know how to listen so that they feel heard. And I've also seen the impact that unresolved grief can have on our lives, like we discussed, emotionally, mentally. And this is why I wholeheartedly believe in this work that I do. It is transformative work.
Yes, 100%. Like I'm sitting here and I'm thinking a lot of people have issues. And I say issues because they don't think they've learned how to deal with their own emotional loss or their emotions. And I'm just like, if they had certain type of steps or guidance of how to deal with their issues, they may not take it out on other people. Like you said, anger, like a lot of people hold that anger and they don't know how to express themselves. They haven't been taught. I'm sitting here going, and not me personally, but you look at society and you're just like, wow, I think we need to go back a bit and realize that a lot of us are dealing with issues that haven't been addressed and we don't know how to address it. And you're right, everybody just tells you, suck it up. No, don't cry, he's smile, he's a lollipop. And you're just like, okay, but I still feel like crap. Like, how are you gonna fix me?
Exactly. And so, like you said, with the lollipop, we call it STIRBs in grief recovery, where it's like short-term energy relieving behaviors, right? So the lollipop tastes good and it distracts us from the uncomfortable feeling that we're having, but it doesn't actually resolve the feeling. So
Yeah.
fast forward now to adults where people have issues with food or alcohol or drugs or gambling or online shopping, or binge watching Netflix or
Or
gaming
eating too
for a
much.
weekend. All of these
Yeah.
things, right? Because we've learned that when we're uncomfortable, we look for a substance outside of us to help us resolve what's actually going on inside of us.
I need to fix my face. Okay. I just need to fix my face. Okay. So yes, thank you. Thank you. I really need to do another episode. I really want to do one on male, like just like a list in my head.
I would love to do
As
one for men because honest to God, Mo, I think that would be super powerful.
it's not even powerful. I think it's needed because I wonder about a lot of men that are abusive. I wonder about a lot of men that don't have self-confidence. A lot of men that are being taken advantage of. And I'm just talking about men, but like there's women that are the same way too. But I think it's not addressed because you hear about helping with women, but there's a lot of men that are that abusive because they have issues that they haven't addressed.
Well,
And
think
that
about
is
it.
something, yeah, go.
When we see women crying, it's, you may think whatever you think, but it's almost like more socially acceptable to see a woman in tears than it is to see a man in tears. And so think about it. Like we've all been taught big boys and big girls don't cry. So we all sort of suppress it. But men especially hear that message so much more than we do, right? Even as they grow up, like same thing, like man up, don't be a P word, all these things, right? So what happens is they suppress even more so. And so what happens is it's more socially acceptable. It's not, but it is. People will accept a man being angry before they'll accept a man being sad. And it
100%.
actually takes tremendous courage to show up with our vulnerability, as opposed to showing up with this mask on that we're strong or that we've got it and that we don't feel, and it shuts us down. And we can do that. There's no judgment
It's
for
easier
people
than
that
that.
have
Yeah.
that. But the problem is then you're limiting your capacity for happiness in your life. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so
Kirsten, you're talking to me. You're talking to me, Kirsten, back in the future. I wish I met you back in the future, Kirsten. You're talking to me. Sorry, Kirsten, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I feel so much for people when I see people acting out in anger, road rage, any of these things that we see people acting like really super inappropriate for the situation. I just see it through a different lens now. Like I really do see that if we were able to peel the layers away, if people are courageous enough and willing enough to do the work, underneath a lot of those sort of initial emotions like anger, resentment, guilt, shame, underneath it is grief.
And for a second, you made me feel sorry for those people that get reported, because you're right. Like you can't be in that situation, in that mental state, without having something caused in the back, because nobody's born like that. You've had to go through it and you learned it and you had, yeah. So
these people are in pain, and sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes it's like everyone has a story.
yeah.
We don't know what people's stories are, right? So again, I think we need to own our own behavior, but I think also too that we can look with compassion sometimes, instead of judgment around people's actions, because oftentimes there's a reason that we don't understand, and sometimes there's a reason they don't even understand.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta fix my face. Okay, thank you, Chris. I don't even see myself. I'm looking at you, and I'm like, okay, you know what? Well, you look kind of visible here, but it was such an insightful conversation, and audience, we're having her back because I have to ask more questions. I really do. I think this is a conversation that doesn't happen. Period. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever seen like an episode or stuff or even information out there in social media that talks about grief. Nobody wants to talk about grief. It's kind of too personal.
Yeah. So I really want to honor you for giving us the platform to actually talk about this today.
Yeah.
I think it's so important. It like I said, it really is
100%.
life changing. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Mo.
No. Thank you. Because I'm sitting here and I'm just like, everybody goes day to day in their own life, but you don't realize that a lot of things that you weren't self-aware, that you just suck it up. You're just like, girl, you got problems. You gotta go back to where you were source. And I've been lucky that I've had to be self-aware of it. Like I've been one of those people that I'm like, okay, well, come on now. Like this is not going to work. Like you got to fix what's it. And then you see other people, I'm just like, okay, what is the issue? Tell me, talk to me, or yeah.
100%. It's the difference between living consciously and living unconsciously. So are we living by default, or are you actually living by design? And that's the difference between living consciously and unconsciously. Unconsciously is when we react. Consciously is when we respond. And there's a real difference, right, with that. And there's a real difference in how, when we are able to be more conscious in our lives and respond versus reacting, it shifts everything. It has the potential to shift everything.
No, it's true, because I'm not going to keep you longer, but it's more the fact that if somebody says something, instead of reacting, step back and really listen to what they say. And you don't want people you have to have control of your emotions, in the sense that it's not a reaction. You have to understand yourself and what the situation is. If you can calmly respond without getting personal, then you're fine. Some people out there, they got
the
issues.
Reaction is a trigger. So when we get triggered quickly like that, like where it's an immediate, like you're on the attack mode or defensive mode, for that, triggers are just messages for us that something still needs to be healed.
I have one or two of those. I do. I trigger one or two times. I'm not gonna lie. I trigger. I do. I just like, okay, Mo, relax.
So the question to ask yourself is, what's coming up for me right now that I'm reacting like this? And that's the difference of being consciously choosing. So when you're annoyed, what is it about that situation that's annoying you?
It's like, I got things to do. Why are you in my face? Like, I don't have time for this. I'm sorry. I'm like, why are you wasting my time with this? What? No, please move. This is too much energy. But like, it could be at that situation or that moment that's affecting me, but I am self-aware. And sometimes I'm just like, okay, well, you didn't need to do that. And I apologize. Like when I go over the board, I'm like, okay, go suck it up and apologize, because you're wrong, and acknowledging that you're wrong. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's not about wrong or right. It's just that you've made a mistake.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. We're human. We're going to make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. When we own that for ourselves, it also allows us to open space for people to be able to own their mistakes for us, right?
Yes.
So you're opening up a better way of communicating, a better way to connect with people, so that there's actually true connection that can happen there. But it starts with us. It has to start with us.
Because you can't ask someone to do something that you can't do yourself, period.
Exactly. And recognizing that we will flip-flop, between consciously and then I call it our little human, right? It's like, oh, there's Kirsten in her little human moment. We're always going to get triggered by something. But again, just look at it as an opportunity for more healing. So something's coming up that, okay, I need to take a look at. So the big question to always ask yourself when something is bothering you, why? And then get quiet and listen to the answer.
I got to work on that. I'm still working on it. I'm not perfect. By far not perfect. I'm a different person who I am now. I think a lot of it, you say, is just being cautious of what you do and how you behave and how you interact with people. And if you want better results in your interaction with people, you got to look at yourself and see how you come across. Like when I talk to my boyfriend or my siblings, like the way I communicate is different now. I'm more like it's more of coming to understand what I could do to better help the situation instead of blaming, and then trying to understand their point. Like, okay, explain to me where the disconnect, or even what I can do to prevent this from happening, where the miscommunication is coming from.
Yeah. And how different does that sound, right?
Oh, it sounds a lot better. Instead of being like, you did this, that, you did that. Okay. You're just saying it's so much better.
Yeah, because nobody likes to be told that they're wrong, even if we know that we are, right? So when somebody's in our face and doing this, it shuts us down right away. Where somebody's like, help me understand, like, or explain to me, like exactly what you said. It's opening the possibility for connection. It's opening the possibility for communication. That's what most of us want, because we don't want to get into a fight with our siblings or with our boyfriends or our partners or whatever, right? So it just depends on how you want to show up in your life. It's knowing what your why is, right? And how you want your life to be.
It's 100%. I think my last relationship made me realize, okay, you know what? We need to have different communication skills and different things, like just teaching yourself. because it was a big loss for me, but it was more of like, okay, that was a lot. I didn't like who I was as a person. And then I'm like, okay, we need to step back and learn different skill sets to communicate. With time, I learned to know my why. And I'm like, okay, figure it out and have a conversation. With that said, yeah, it was a great conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. We've got
Kirsten,
lots to talk about.
Yes, we do, Kirsten. We do have it. You will be back, Kirsten. Believe me, you'll be back.
Awesome.
Again, really, thank you for being on this. I've been truly enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Mo. I appreciate that.
Have a good day, love.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us today on our weekly episode of Health Your Way podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share with others, and please feel free to comment below and ask any questions on topics we discussed, as well as future topics you'd like to hear about. Have a happy and healthy week, and be sure to tune in next week for the next episode on a Health Your Way podcast.